Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Equality Advisory Support Service podcast. In episodes 1 and 2 we have been exploring some of the ways in which we provide advice via the helpline and also revealed some of the resources that we have available to you to help in bringing any complaints of potential discrimination. Now, as this is the first podcast of 2026, we thought it would be a good idea to have a look back at some of the common issues that we received during the last year. 2025 was a year that certainly saw a huge growth in disability discrimination complaints coming through the helpline. Usually around 70 to 75% of our volume has been disability discrimination complaints. And this has been slightly on the rise during 2025 when we've noticed getting more calls from people complaining about discrimination due to neurodiversity, but also mental health as well. So the purpose of this podcast is to revisit some of the issues that we have received that we've noticed as being very common with the helpline during the last year. As always, I'm joined by my colleague and knowledge manager of EASS, Kat. Hi Kat, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Excellent. And we both are going to take a bit of time to go through some of the common cases that have arrived during last year. I think, Kat, we're going to start off with one that we've certainly had very, very common and high volumes arriving at the helpline. And I think this is neurodiversity in services. So, Kat, just talk us through a little bit about some of the issues that we've seen in this particular area.
Of course, yes, we do see a lot of calls regarding neurodiverse individuals not getting the support that they need when they're accessing local services. An example of this was a contact from a father who wanted to take his autistic son to swimming lessons at his local leisure centre. But he was told that his son couldn't attend lessons because he wasn't able to wear a swimming cap due to a new policy in place. Wearing a swimming cap was difficult for him because he has sensory issues. Despite trying to explain this, they still didn't allow him to access the pool, and obviously the individual felt that they weren't willing to make any type of adjustment to help him access the swimming lesson.
And I think this sort of case fits firmly within that reasonable adjustment duty, really. I think the advice from the helpline would be asking the father in particular to really question the leisure centre on their policies. Now, they're probably trying to rely on some degree of health and safety here for using the swimming cap. But there's got to be a balance with reasonable adjustment duties, hasn't there, Kat?
Yeah.
I think this is something that needs to be explored by the individual here, most definitely. Any more thoughts on this one, Kat?
I think on this one, a key when you are raising anything to do with reasonable adjustments is to keep thinking about what could help to remove that disadvantage. Of course, sometimes, like in this particular instance, it was a specific request not to wear a swimming cap, but is there other ways around it? Keep your mind open to what might be a reasonable resolution for you when you are requesting adjustments.
And it's a real shame here because quite clearly the individual would not have been able to have participated in the swimming pool due to the policy of the, what we're not clear on here is whether it was a policy of the actual pool or whether it was an individual trying to enforce something that perhaps was flexible. And I think that's one thing people need to look out for as well. And my advice there was get a real clear steer on what policy or process that a service provider is trying to follow, and really have that conversation around, is that flexible, can that be changed to accommodate one individual? Because clearly without that adjustment of allowing the policy to change and that child not having to wear a swimming cap, he's unable to take part in the swimming session. But again, I think this is, that's one example that we've given here, but I think it goes to show we've had a lot of complaints from neurodiverse individuals, in particular around accessing complaints processes, which is something that is very, very common. And they can be quite complex calls for us because it's always very messy when somebody's trying to complain about a complaints process. We find those can be quite tricky. I just want to move on slightly now and also look at the subtle rise in race discrimination calls that we've seen coming through. A lot still based, unfortunately, on colour, which is really quite difficult to understand because a lot of the incidents you would not be expecting to happen in modern times, but it does seem that there has been a rise in individuals finding that they are being subjected to racial abuse and racial comments, in particular at work as well, which is very, very sad to see. One thing I will say off the back of this is if you feel that you have experienced any form of race discrimination yourself, please make sure you call us, even if it is just to get a bit of an idea in terms of what your rights, your legal rights are likely to be under the Equality Act, and we'll give you the best possible guidance that we can in terms of how you can move forward with that particular complaint. So please don't just sort of sit there and allow the issue just to occur. We really would recommend that you seek advice from us. But I just want to go back now to education issues. Again, we've seen a lot coming through, and this probably makes up a huge proportion of calls that we have arriving at the helpline. And again, going back to neurodiversity, but this time within education, and more specifically within schools. So, Kat, do you want to talk us through some of what we've seen during 2025 in this particular area?
Yes, of course. So within the sector of education, I do have to say neurodiversity is probably one of the biggest, let's say, disability types that we do get contact about. And a lot of these cases were around neurodiverse individuals being punished for behaviours that parents felt could be mitigated if they provided reasonable adjustments. And for a lot of the children or parents of children that contacted us, they didn't have things in place like an EHCP. Typical punishments were things like exclusions, being placed in isolation or detention, or having privileges removed. A few contacts that were received last year were around neurodiverse individuals who weren't able to access residential trips with their classmates. So a lot of those types of things where it is essentially going to be a conversation with that education provider around reasonable adjustments for that child.
Yeah, and just to be completely clear, when Kat mentions EHCPs there, you're talking about education healthcare plans, which are specific to England, and we are aware of very similar issues around additional support needs in Scotland and also special educational needs in Wales as well. But the concept is always the same. It tends to be incidents that are happening that has triggered a particular behaviour in a child that then has gone on to result in a sanction, and quite often that could lead to small sanctions like a detention, slightly larger sanctions like missing out on trips and residential trips, to worst case scenario, the child ultimately being excluded from school as well, which is very, very common. And sadly, we saw a very, very strong volume of calls in this particular area in 2025. One thing I want to mention as well, going back to the world of work as well, just very briefly, we saw still a continued rise in sexual harassment complaints arriving at the helpline as well. And we know the law is starting to strengthen in this area now as well, with more responsibilities being placed on employers to do what they reasonably can to prevent third-party harassment. And the law is still going to be continued to be strengthened in this particular area as we head into 2026 as well. What it might have done with more conversations around sexual harassment, it might have promoted more calls coming through to the helpline. But nonetheless, it is really sad to see the volume of calls that we've had coming through in this particular area, and a lot of women in particular seeking our advice in terms of what to do. These can be very difficult because you're dealing with situations where either the issue could be passed off as either a joke or a bit of banter, right the way through to more serious allegations of sexual harassment as well. Either way, women in particular have a right to be safe and secure and not subjected to the degrees of harassment that we've seen coming through the helpline. And it is a real shame that we've seen these calls coming through. But nonetheless, we are here to support individuals with their complaints. And the best thing to do is, if you feel that you have been subjected to any form of harassment, including sexual harassment, then you're more than welcome to contact the helpline. Now, moving back to the sector of services, and in particular the banking and financial industries, we've seen a big rise in calls, in particular from disabled individuals, and the access to the banking services. So, Kat, do you want to talk us through what we've had coming through?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there has been a rise in disabled access in the sector of services in general, but particularly within banking, you could kind of see the big impact that having a disability has on inflexible processes. An example was an autistic individual who lacked capacity, so their mother ran the bank for her, but the bank is now saying that she shouldn't have an account, and that they're required to have deputyship from the court protection or something similar to that. Obviously deputyship does come at a cost, and the customer did feel that to be told to suddenly get this was not only burdensome but also not reasonable. In another similar case, again, this links with an autistic individual. They were not able to make any payments to a service provider because the bank had blocked the card and made changes to the account. What they wanted that individual to do was to record a video of the autistic individual saying words which appear on the screen. However, this autistic individual is non-verbal since birth, so it was the parents that were contacted on their behalf. And this seemed to be the only way to resolve the issues that they were facing, even despite previously submitting relevant evidence that authorised the parents to manage those finances on their son's behalf.
So again, very complex, and we understand that there are very specific rules around financial services and ensuring that basically the best interests of the customer are adhered to. But what you're saying there is that there seems to be some very rigid processes that basically are excluding neurodivergent individuals from banking and financial services, which is quite a common issue. And more broader than that as well, we do get a lot of complaints around financial industries, in particular around accessible formats.
Yes.
That seems to be quite a common area in which we get contacts. Off the top of your head, can you think of any examples we've had through in 2025 around that area?
We had a lot of contact from individuals where they wanted a certain type of correspondence or communication. Typically, it would be that they would require not to use an email, for example, but obviously they're getting pushed to use email with certain organisations, which they felt that they couldn't do. They needed to speak to somebody, and often the barrier was nobody was there to do that for them, unfortunately.
Excellent, thanks, Kat. I think I've skipped a paragraph actually. We've got some notes here obviously to keep us on track with this, but talking around one of the most common areas that we get calls on, and that is around assistance dogs. So Kat, do you want to reveal a bit more about this area?
Yes, this is definitely an issue that rises and falls on the helpline, but we have seen a slight rise in cases about assistance dogs, in particular accessing services. So the barrier here comes where organisations are asking for proof that the dog is assistance dog trained in some way, but a lot of disabled individuals have owner trained dogs which they themselves trained to assist them with their disability. Now, a popular pub chain did come up a few times, And this was because they were asking for proof that the animals were like AD UK, Assistance Dogs UK, or other relevant body trained, when in fact they weren't, and they couldn't produce those documents for them, and as a result were refused entry into the pub with their assistance dog.
Yeah, very, very common issues we see coming through the helpline, and it can be quite complicated for service providers to understand and differentiate between what is and what is not a legitimate assistance dog, and quite clearly there are going to be processes in place preventing dogs to access certain services based on health and safety. But we all understand that there are going to be exceptions that apply to assistance dogs. So I suppose the complicating factor here is working out what is and what is not an assistance dog. And again, we're more than happy to talk to you on the helpline about your rights under the reasonable adjustment duty when it comes to these particular scenarios. But yeah, these seem to be the main common issues that we've had throughout the year via the helpline. And looking forward into 2026, it would be really wrong of us to try and give any sort of forecast, because we genuinely don't know what's coming around the corner. I think 2025 has proven to us that issues that we thought had gone away in the past have started to resurface, which has been quite interesting to see that happening. But what I would say to our listeners is, if any of you are experiencing any form of discrimination, whether it's based on religion, race, sex, sexual orientation, your disability, any of the 9 protected characteristics, you're welcome to contact the helpline and seek advice from us. And the way you get hold of us is quite simple. We are available free phone 0808 800 0082, or you can email us using the contact us form on the website, which is equalityadvisoryservice.com. On the website also we have live chat facilities available. That is available when our advisors are not on calls. Please appreciate we are not a huge team of advisors, and we are trying to serve people across the 3 nations with their complaints of discrimination. So live chat sometimes will get switched off if we are incredibly busy on the telephones, which can happen at peak periods. Also talking about peak periods as well, best time to phone us probably first thing in the morning, 9 o'clock, it's a good time to get hold of us, or a little bit later in the afternoon, so trying to avoid the lunchtime rush basically when we can be at our busiest. But we welcome any contact from any individual who feels that they have experienced discrimination. But we hope that little recap of 2025 has been useful. We will be looking forward to helping as many individuals as we possibly can going into 2026. And in February, we'll be releasing episode 4 of our podcast series. Subject still to be determined, but we will make sure that it is something of value for you to listen to. But Kat, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And we will speak to you all again very shortly.